Our next speaker is Patrick Harpur, and you can read his fine bio in your day program today. He's the acclaimed author of Daimonic Reality, 2 novels, The Serpent's Circle and The Rapture. He's explored classic Fortean subjects like anomalous lights, mysterious angelic beings, subhumans, tricksters, which we heard a little about in our first presentation this morning. And he's explored super reality as well. Charles Fort termed that perhaps super geography, the greater reality in which we coexist. There's a wonderful quote by H.L. Mencken that seems to pertain quite admirably to Mr. Harpur's presentation this afternoon and indeed his career work. That is, penetrating so many secrets, we cease to believe in the unknowable. But there it sits, nevertheless, calmly licking its chops.
That's delicious.
Delicious. And on that note of deliciousness, the topic is Daimonic Reality. The speaker, Patrick Harpur. Please welcome him.
Hi, everybody. This has flown me in here at great expense. So I hope I live up to expectations. I stole my gun from me. Stop smoking, that's a mistake. I want to talk about reality. A bit over-ambitious, I think, probably, but you know, if I can't take a shot at it here, then where? And I want to come at it from a kind of oblique angle, from the point of view of visions and apparitions. Not kind of big, respectable visions like St. Teresa's vision of the Godhead, Wordsworth's vision of nature or whatever, but from comparatively trivial visions like UFOs and fairies, which everyone, you know, the press, science, academia can all happily unite in providing. We Forteans know better, of course. We know that people have always and everywhere seen funny things. We suspect seeing funny things is a normal part of reality rather than an aberration. Some of us even suspect that seeing funny things gives us a clue as to what reality is really like. One person who thought so anyway is my hero of mine, the great Irish poet W.B. Yeats. He says, "I often entangle myself in arguments as to what is the true nature of apparitions. But at other times I say, as Socrates said, the common opinion is enough for me, and believe that all nature is full of invisible people, and that some of them are ugly and grotesque, others wicked and foolish, many beautiful beyond anyone we have ever seen. They are surely there, the divine people, for only we who have neither simplicity nor wisdom have denied them. And the simple of all ages, and the wise men of ancient times, have seen them and even spoken to them." It says it already. But we notice that Yeats takes an implicit swipe at sophisticated, educated people who are no longer simple enough, and not yet wise enough, to believe in and see apparitions. He was the wisest man in ancient Greece, and so, like Yeats, he gave weight to the common opinion. He gave credence to the sightings of ordinary people. In Socrates' time, of course, people saw nymphs and fauns and satyrs, dryads, and all sorts of things like that. Yeats's people saw what the Irish call the Tuatha Dé They're also known as the good people, the gentry, the sheep. And they also saw a separate species of little people. But all these are collectively known, by the English anyway, as fairies. The Irish don't call them fairies, they call them by their names. And fairies were known all over Europe, whether as the Anglo-Saxon elves, or the trolls and Hunderfolk of Scandinavia. And every county in England had a different name for fairies. They're still seen today, along with new kinds of apparition appropriate to our culture, such as UFOs, and the little people associated with them, which we call aliens. Now, fairy would be a good general name for all these kinds of apparitions, but in order to give this talk a bogus air of scholarship, I'm going to use the Greek word for them, daimones, or diamonds, but I have trouble saying diamonds, so I'm going to call them daemons.
And these, of course, are not to be confused with the Christian demons, with demons that Christianity turned them into.
Now, I don't need to linger on the weird and wonderful things that people have seen, because most people know them better than I do, but just to remind you of the flavour of these kinds of apparitions, I'll mention a few. I'll mention, for instance, an English police constable, Godfrey, who sat in his car one night watching a huge, brightly lit dome-shaped object hovering above a road in Todmorden, Lancashire. Nobody, he said, will convince me that I didn't see what I saw. And that's a typical remark, typical sighting. If only I could make you believe what I saw, said Mike Sachs, who with his brother and a friend were up on the hills above Backer, also in Lancashire, when they were confronted with a similar object that came whiting out of the sky like a lift out of control. They clearly saw its metallic structure, its rows of lights, its rectangular inserts. UFOs are real, said Mike. Nobody could possibly convince me otherwise after what I saw. He was actually unique in having gone up there specifically to look for a UFO. Well, not unique, but there was something very fishy about Mike Sachs. But he means that, of course, the UFOs are nuts and bolts spacecraft, but just as often, of course, they're less straightforward. They can merge and separate, more like organisms than machines. And just when you think they're indisputably there, they're gone, like a light that's been switched off. Or else they disappear at inconceivable speeds. But anomalous lights have been seen just about forever. In the 5th century, the Syrian Neoplatonist Iamblichus, whose works you're familiar with, I expect, called them phasmata, bright lights associated with the gods and daemons. Daimonic phasmata, he says, are various and dreadful, appearing at one time great and at another small. Such shape-changing is a notorious feature of Irish fairies, who often manifest as clusters of aerial lights. Dermot McManus reports that a friend of his, a Miss Patricia, saw such lights all rise up as one from a fort on the side of a loch and sail steadily across the water to a fort on the other side. The forts, of course, were fairy forts. They're these strange structures that appear all over Ireland. They're also called raths or lissies, prehistoric earthworks whose origins have disappeared beyond time and into myth. And they are traditionally where the people of fairy live. In one of them, according to Mrs. Sheridan, an informant of Yates's friend, Lady Gregory, she says, I used to often see like a door. I have to do this in the Galway accent. I used often to see like a door open at night, the light shining through it, just as it might shine through the house door. Many of them, I see, they're like ourselves, only wearing bracket clothes, and their bodies not so thick as ours, and their eyes are more shining. McManus's gardener agreed. He looked up from his work one day towards Lissard, which was the fairy fort on McManus's land, and he saw the bank lined with a score or more of the fairy folk. All life-size, he said. The women mostly young and good-looking, with shawls over their heads. The men wore red and brown coats, and some wore conical hats. All of them had penetrating, staring eyes, which seemed to pierce right through me. Like the phasmata of daemons, the little people are not always so little. But the discrepancy may be more apparent than real. 4-foot fairy told the Sligo man, I'm bigger than I appear to you now. We make the old young, the big small, the small big. And this is a respectable and ancient view. In the 5th century, Proclus attributed similar shape changing to the gods. In all initiations and mysteries, he wrote, dreams and visions, the gods exhibit many forms of themselves and appear in a variety of shapes, and sometimes an unformed light of them is held forth to view. Sometimes this light is figured according to the human form. So we see that just because an anomalous light seems to be intelligent, it's not necessarily a craft from outer space, nor are the aliens associated with these craft necessarily visitors from other planets. Anomalous lights herald all manner of personages, not just so-called fairies and aliens, but all kinds of daemons, even gods.
Joyce Bowles and Ted Pratt were driving along one night near Winchester in the south of England, when they noticed a strange orange glow in the sky. No sooner had they swerved to a halt, than the light appeared hovering in front of them. A figure emerged from it. He was about 6 foot tall, slim, and wore a one-piece foil-like suit. His hair was long and blonde, his beard was dark. He approached the car. When he peered in, Joyce and Ted saw that his nose was long and pointed, and his eyes were entirely pink without pupils. After his encounter with the dome-shaped thing, police constable Godfrey later, under hypnosis of course, remembered being inside a circular room where he was examined by 8 entities he described as horrible and as small as 5-year-old boys, with metallic bodies, with heads like lamps and eyes like vertical lines. In other words, funny lights or UFOs are often accompanied by, for want of a better word, personifications. They may even be aspects of the same phenomena. For instance, Napoleon had a guiding light he called a star, and it sometimes appeared as a sort of shining sphere, and at other times, he said, as a dwarf clothed in red. When it appeared as the sphere, it guided him, his destiny he followed. When it appeared as the red dwarf, it warned him when he was in trouble. So they're kinds of perhaps different aspects of the same thing. Perhaps aliens don't so much inhabit spacecraft as represent different aspects or manifestations of them. Our interpretation of apparitions depends a great deal on our culture. A traditional culture would probably identify the pink-eyed alien as one of the ancestors or gods. Mary McLaughlin was walking past the local church in Knock, County Mayo in Ireland, when she saw a dazzling light and some figures in an adjoining field. She hurried off to fetch her friend Margaret Bird. Together they saw 3 persons in silvery garments surrounded by a brilliant light, and they were standing on top of the grass in the meadow. In all, 18 people saw these apparitions, which were eventually agreed to be not spacemen, not even fairies, you might expect, but the Virgin Mary with St. John the Evangelist and St. Joseph, and not, of course, been a place of pilgrimage ever since.
Now, when anthropologists discuss the supernatural entities which their pet tribes see and believe in, they tend to call them spirits, for want of a better word. I think that daemon is probably a better word, because it avoids the misleading notion that somehow the entities are either material or non-material, immaterial, or purely spiritual. They can be, but then again, as we all know, they can be as solid as a brick, or at least have an undoubted physical effect on you. UFO contact can leave you feeling ill for weeks. Victims of alleged alien abductions return bearing scars. But this in itself is not new. Medieval accounts of near-death experiences tell us that the victims returned with identical scars inflicted on them by demons while they were in purgatory. Quite a lot of contemporary accounts of that. Aliens are always zapping us with energy and rays, just as the fairies can stun us with the stroke, touch, words medicine still uses. Neil Colton of Donegal was up berry picking with his female cousin when they heard the sound of music. We hurried around the rocks and saw 6 of the gentlefolk they dancing, and when they saw us, the little woman, all in red, came running towards us, and she struck my cousin across the face with a green rush. We ran for home as hard as we could, and when my cousin reached the house, she fell dead. Of course, she was actually revived later by the priest, who interestingly took his stole and struck her and chanted Latin as if it was kind of reversing the fairy effect. So, daemons can be both material and immaterial, and this is only one of the many contradictions that they embody. Yeats had big dreams and visions all his life. For example, he woke up suddenly one night to find a young man and a young girl standing by his bed. She was dressed in olive green clothes, gathered about her neck, some kind of stiff material. And what filled me with wonder, he wrote, was the marvelous mildness of her face. There are no such faces now. It was peaceful, like the faces of animals, or like mountain pools of evening, so peaceful it was a little sad. Not all bedroom visitors are so benign. Our friends, the little greys, are rarely pleasant. Their eyes are not silvery and lustrous, like those of the fairies, but big and black, almond-shaped. Whitney Stryver described their eyes as amazing, electrifying, the huge staring eyes of the old gods. There was in their gaze an element that is completely implacable. I had no personal freedom at all. So daemons can be both nice and nasty, beautiful and ugly, just as Yeats said in my opening quotation. But what are they all up to? Well, call me old-fashioned, but when I have a difficult question like that, I find it's best to consult Plato. And sure enough, Plato has no doubt about the function of daemons. He says, everything that is daimonic is intermediate between God and mortal, interpreting and conveying the wishes of men to the gods and the will of the gods to men. The daimonic stands between the two and fills the gap. God has no contact with man. Only through the daimonic is there intercourse and conversation between men and gods, whether in the waking state or during sleep. And the man who is an expert in such intercourse is a daimonic man. Well, clearly Yeats was a daimonic man of this kind. The safety probably was Mr. Stryber, and all the psychics and mediums and shamans or shamans who each in their own way converse with the daemons. Clearly too, Charles Fort understood the nature of daimonic reality when he wrote of our existence of the hyphen, everything being in a state of intermediateness. Daemons are his hyphens, the intermediaries who guarantee the continuity of the universe. Yeats grew up among the people he called the simple of all ages. And all his life he was attracted to Irish mythology and Irish folklore. Believing in fairies, he also believed what anthropology confirms, that all pre-literate tribal cultures, I'll call them traditional cultures, recognize similar powerful daemons whose presence we ignore at our peril. As he entered the world of education and rationalism, he wanted to square these traditional fairy beliefs with intellectual Western culture. He was able to do this by envisaging the realm of fairy as a metaphor for that area which as a poet interested him most, and I mean imagination. Yeats was especially encouraged in his interest in the imagination by, of course, the example of William Blake, whose work he spent years editing. But Blake seemed to retain that traditional visionary view of the world, such as children have. He used to see angels in trees or a heavenly host in the sun. But at the same time, he was a very sophisticated and intellectual man. And he formulated a theory of imagination as man's primary way of grasping the world. And this was something he shared with the other great romantic poets such as Goethe, Rilke, Poe, Wordsworth, Keats, Shelley, and above all Samuel Taylor Coleridge, who famously proclaimed, "The primary imagination I hold to be the living power and prime agent of all human perception, and is a repetition in the finite mind of the eternal act of creation in the infinite I am." No idea what he means by that. But one person who thought he did and can help us on this is the great poet W.H. Auden. "The only concern of the primary imagination," says Auden, "is with sacred beings and events. They can't be anticipated, they must be encountered. Our response to them is a passion of awe. It may be terror or panic, wonder or joy, but it must be awful." Auden's sacred beings and events are our daemons, archetypal images which imagination generates. I must emphasize that imagination in the poetic, romantic, true sense is pretty much the opposite of what has come to mean something unreal or invented in the feeble images that we kind of call up into consciousness. True imagination is an independent realm with its own laws, very much like the collective unconscious. The archetypal psychologists call it the mundus imaginalis, the imaginal world. It precedes and underpins mere perception, and it spontaneously produces those gods, daemons, and heroes who interact in the unaltered narratives we call myths. The earliest model of both imagination and the collective unconscious goes back to the Neo-Platonic philosophers. Like Plato, they understood that daemons are intermediate between gods and mortals, but they took this insight further, recognizing a kind of whole daimonic state, partly spiritual, partly physical, which mediated between our sensory world and the spiritual, intelligible world, as they call it. where Plato's forms, those abstract gods, existed. This intermediate state came to be known in Latin as the anima mundi, the soul of the world, and this is the world daemons come from. All traditional cultures believe in a world soul, except they don't have a concept for it. They don't abstract from their world, but see it in the first instance as animate, instinct with soul. We've tended to empty the world of soul and reduced it to dead matter, obeying mechanical laws. And we pejoratively call this worldview animistic, a term which effectively writes off what it claims to describe. To animistic societies, there's no such thing as animism. There's only nature presenting itself in all its immediacy as daemon-ridden. Every mountain, grove, rock, spring has its genius or numen, infant, elf, hamadryad, and so on. Now, it is customary in a talk like this, I suppose, to invoke science at some point to reassure everyone that one isn't a complete nutter crackpot. But I'm really not inclined to bother. So amongst people who read Charles Fort and know what he had to say about science. And secondly, because it is rather a defensive way of proceeding, we all wouldn't be much use of it. Besides, science has nothing to say about visions, apparitions, and proper scientists very properly ignore them. Unhappily, science has bred an ideology called Scientism, which is roughly a mixture of philosophical materialism and logical positivism. And this feels it has a duty to meddle in, explain away everything which doesn't fit into its rather dreary, materialistic, mechanistic framework. And it was, in fact, this view, Scientism rather than science, that Fort attacked. In the scientific view, daemons are simply impossible. They're certainly not out there. If people claim to see them, they can only be subjective illusions, all in the mind, or even better, all in the brain. Daemons become byproducts of physical disorders. I think the current favourite is something called temporal lobe seizure. In other words, St. Teresa had epilepsy, or I don't know. In short, the daemons are medicalized, as C.G. Jung said, always implementing with the gods have become diseases. But however inadequate scientism is to explain the real, luminous, ghastly, or glorious things that people see, it does highlight the most pressing question about such experiences. Are they objective out there? Are they all in the mind, subjective? I think these are trick questions because they're framed by our dualistic worldview. And we've come to believe that reality must be either subjective or objective, but we rarely consider that reality might be both at once.
The daemons might be tailor-made to demonstrate that it's possible for reality to be both at once. It might even be argued that if they have any purpose at all, it's to subvert the very worldview which denies them. Like traditional imps, daemons delight in teasing, even madness. It's telling the serious, rational people get very cross whenever daemons are mentioned. Things weren't actually very different even in medieval times. Everybody, that is all the common people, believed in the daemons. But the official worldview, the prevailing orthodoxy, hadn't any place for them at all. It wasn't, of course, a scientific view like ours, but a theological worldview. And it believed that creation consisted of a great chain of being, with God at the top, followed by the 9 orders of angels, man, animals, gods, rocks, wonderful system. But the daemons are left out. No fairies. Everybody saw fairies all the time. Weren't in that. They are marginal, fugitive creatures, wrote C.S. Lewis, to whom the medieval cosmos does not assign an official status. But to his credit, C.S. Lewis doesn't get bad tempered by it. Their unimportance is their importance, he says. They have an imaginative value, introducing a welcome hint of wildness and uncertainty into a universe which is in danger of being a little too self-explanatory. And this is as true now as it was then. Daemons are nature's own uncertainty, whose role is always to be unofficial, always beyond the pale.
Some people still awake?
Yes, you said something about getting paid.
I've got a bit of jet lag here. I wonder who would fall asleep first, you, me, or you. Right, I'd like now to consider briefly another of Plato's daimonic men, whose intercourse with daemons forced him to revise his belief in the reality of our subject-object dualism, as in fact all daimonic contact must and does. First of all, he dreamt of a daemon, a winged being sailing across the sky, who turned out to be an old man with horns. This being soon began to visit our man when he was awake as well as asleep. At times he seemed to me quite real, as if he were a living personality. I went walking up and down the garden with him. To me he was what the Indians call a guru. He brought me the crucial insight that there are things in the psyche which I do not produce, which have their own life. In his view, thoughts were like animals in the forest or people in a room. It was he who taught me psychic objectivity, the reality of the psyche. The daemon was called Philemon, and the man was, of course, C.G. Jung, a great Swiss psychologist. It was Philemon, then, who taught Jung that much, even most of what we think of as our subjectivity, our psyche, is in fact objective. Jung confirmed this by delving into people's dreams and fantasies and uncovering there, as you know, at the collective level of the psyche, the collective unconscious, peopled with archetypal images that led an independent, objective life. These images could be of anything, but they tended to be persons who ranged from the little people, that was Jung's affectionate name for the complexes, to the archetypal images of the gods. Jung emphasized that it's not a case of us personifying the images of the unconscious, turning them into persons. No, rather, the archetypal images are, he said, endowed with personality at the outset, manifesting themselves as daimones, as daemons. They are felt as actual experiences and are not figments of the imagination, as rationalism would lead us to believe. In his own arcane, strange, almost Blakean mythology, Jung remained faithful to the daemons, refusing to abstract them into concepts, and retaining their concrete personified nature by calling them shadow, anima, wise old man, great mother, and so on. When he discovered historical counterparts to his own mythology of the unconscious, he was as surprised as anyone to find them in those strange, forgotten, largely ridiculed philosophies, Hermeticism, Gnosticism, above all, alchemy. However, although Jung dissolved, as it were, the duality between subject and object, he only shifted the duality elsewhere. He saw that the psyche could be both subjective and objective, but he still clung to the idea that the psyche itself was located entirely within us. Anything that appeared as if outside us was merely a projection from within. But even this last bastion of dualism was to crumble, and the occasion of its crumbling, as so often, came to him in a dream. And it was a dream of a UFO encounter. He saw two lens-shaped, metallic, gleaming discs which hurtled over the house and down to the lake. Then something else, as perfectly circular as a lens, flew directly towards him. It was joined by another, a lens with a metallic extension led to a magic lantern, a projector. He woke. The thought came to him, we always think that UFOs are projections of ours. Now it turns out we are their projections. I am projected by the magic lantern as C.G. Jung, but who manipulates the apparatus? Here it was brought home to him in a really concrete way, what he already knew, that the unconscious generated ego consciousness and took precedence over it. Consciousness and the unconscious reflect each other. From the point of view of the unconscious, from the point of view of the daemons, that is, our conscious world is a dream. We are images, just as we conceive of them as being. As Yeats said, mirror on mirror, mirror is all the show. So, in the end, Jung decided that it was a prejudice to restrict the psyche to being inside the body. Insofar as the psyche has a non-spatial aspect, there may well be a psyche outside the body, a region so utterly different from my psychic sphere that one has to get out of oneself to get there. Jung imagined this region as an alien country outside the ego, another world, that is, in invisible but present in this one, inhabited by the ancestors, daemons, gods, just as traditional cultures describe. In one sense, the other world is within us. In another sense, if we penetrate deeply enough within ourselves, it's as if the psyche turns inside out. At bottom, said Jung, psyche is simply the world. To the eyes of a man of imagination, said Blake, nature is imagination itself. To engage with daemons is to realize that there are not two worlds, one inside and one outside, but one world with two aspects. In this respect, the philosophy or epistemology of fairy belief is more sophisticated than ours. Visionary experiences are said to be the work of the fairies, who either put glamour on something of the world so that it's not what it seems, or else they put something called pichot on us so that we perceive differently. In other words, reality lies sometimes more in the world, sometimes more with us. There's no hard and fast line to be drawn between the two. Daimonic reality flows through everything and over every division. It's we who have slammed the doors of perception and cut ourselves off from perception of the divine. Daimonic reality, therefore, is never either or, always both and, both spiritual and physical, objective and subjective, insiders, outsiders. In fact, we might suspect that there's virtually no boundary they don't straddle, and no opposition they don't mediate.
Very important thing though is that they've had a very thin time of it in Western culture. They're the very stuff of pagan root, the ones we call animistic or polytheistic, but Christianity has given them rather short shrift, and worse still, Christianity's ideological legacies, which includes science. Christianity tends to deal with the daemons in two ways. It either Christianizes them, not too bad, or demonizes them, too good. Christianizing is the healthier option. It replaces the daemons with the mediating saints, and especially with the Virgin Mary, who has supplanted many streaming holy well, and who still appears all over the world to children in visions, especially children. Elves and fairies and the like, who no one can cope with, and are not outlawed but brought into the fold and rechristened as fallen angels. Thus, popular Christianity, especially in Mediterranean Roman Catholicism, can carry on much as always in a vital, pagan sort of way, which feeds the souls of its worshippers who still pay their allegiance to the daemons without worrying too much about theology. The demonizing of daemons is a more serious matter. It seems to stem from a strange puritanical streak in Christianity, which became most explicit at the Reformation. Neither the Protestants nor the Counter-Reformationists could tolerate daemons at any price. They were just branded demons, and you had to avoid them at all costs. But this anti-daemonic streak isn't exclusive to Judeo-Christian culture. It was implicit also in pagan mythologies as well. The archetypal perspective associated with Apollo, for instance, was an anti-daemonic one. As god of purity, clarity, reason, and illumination, god of science, he's always at odds with his ambiguous trickster brother Hermes, the most daemonic of the gods. So-called solar heroes are also antagonistic to daemons and to soul, often represented by a female partner. Muscle-bound Hercules or Heracles, Apollo's strong right arm, does nothing but club the daemons. In Hades, the underworld realm of imagination, he can't grasp the shades as daemonic images, but treats them as literal and does his best to slaughter them. In willfully denying the daemonic realm, he may well be the mythic prototype of our puritanical streak, of what James Hillman has called the heroic northern Protestant ego, the dominating ego of our Western culture, which hates and fears soul. It denounces imagination and myth, banishes the daemons from the world, it separated itself from nature to bring about our subject-object dualism, and deified rationalism during the so-called Enlightenment of the 18th century. Finally, of course, it led to our own modern scientific worldview, which is so thoroughly Apollo-like in its contempt for daemon, anything dangerous, cult, rational, mythic, or even feminine. Well, you can, repress or ignore the daemons, but you can't do away with them. Being immortal, they always return. They come back, they torment the over-ascetic in their cells and labs, they madden the over-rational with their irrationality. Scoured from nature, they reappeared in the drawing rooms. The spirits of the seance, banned from the planet, they return from on high as extraterrestrials. Denied by skeptical urban sophisticates, they cry out with alien voices from the psychoanalyst's come. Better there to cheer you up. The real damage done by this heroic Protestant northern ego, don't know what to call it for short, isn't so much the demonizing of the daemons into literal devils as literalism itself. Daemons are real, but not literally real. And if the only reality we recognize is literal reality, we simply can't recognize the daemons. But their continued presence attests to a reality which is primarily mythic and imaginative. Literal reality is a construct of the ego's literal perspective, which strangely insists that it's not a perspective at all, but a property inherent in the world. It insists that it's the objective and only truth, when in fact it's only one of many perspectives, one way of imagining. Literalism typically claims that its own myths, like materialism or the theory of evolution, are not myths but history and fact. Blake castigated literalism for its singleness of vision, for seeing with the eye only and not through the eye. His recommendation was that we develop a kind of double vision, a sense of metaphor, which, as its etymology suggests, is the ability to carry across, to translate one worldview in terms of another. With my inward eye, I see an old man grey, with my outward, a thistle across the way. That's what Blake said. It sounds a bit like Carlos Castaneda, doesn't it? The world we inhabit, then, is the world we imagine, or the world that is imagined through us. But there's always another world according to other perspectives, according to whatever other daemon looks through our eyes. The collective unconscious, imagination, soul of the world are all models of this other world, all analogous to each other, all metaphors for daimonic reality, which is, of course, only another metaphor. The ultimate reality to which these models refer is unknown. It's just a mystery. Soul, the unconscious, imagination, whatever model we use, are in themselves non-spatial and timeless. But they always, for some reason or other, represent themselves spatially as another world, which begins where our normal worlds leave off. The other world is imagined at the edge of maps, beyond which there be dragons, or at the edge of consciousness, beyond which there be archetypes. It can be imagined temporarily as a past Arcadia, or as a future utopia. It can be imagined as beneath the earth, or beyond the solar system. It can be imagined as before birth or after death. For a child, it can simply be imagined as beyond the garden gate. Irish fairy lore cleverly avoids our tendency to mistake another world for a literal place by representing its non-spatial nature in terms of multi-spatiality. That's to say that Irish fairy lore believes that fairies come from beneath the earth, but they believe simultaneously that they come from under the sea, or from the air, or from islands out to the west. And all these theories are entertained simultaneously as part of the fairy phenomena. Unlike ufology, which believes it's always plumps for one special place. Everybody's got their pet place that UFOs come from, within the hollow earth, under the sky. But I think the Irish are more sophisticated. All viewed simultaneously, that's Fortwood. He said quickly. Daemons favour the cracks in reality. The twilight zones where this world and the other world intersect. These can be within us, between consciousness and unconsciousness, between sleep and waking, or they can be outside us, at natural boundaries like bridges, crossroads, shorelines, where traditional apparitions of ghosts and black dogs and white ladies and fairies appear. They especially like boundary times, with sunset or midnight, turning of the day, or the turning of the year at Midsummer's Eve or Halloween. But these fleeting encounters of intersections not infrequently turn into full-blown journeys in which we step over the threshold into the other world. This often occurs involuntarily. Every traditional society believes that the souls of its members are vulnerable to abduction by daemons, especially the bad human daemons, those witches, and only good daimonic humans, the witch doctors, can combat. In fairy belief, unbaptized babies and unchurched mothers are most at risk of being snatched by the fairies, because until the church has laid its heavy hand on them, they're still in that fluid, daimonic state in between condition that makes them easy meat for the demons, easy to snatch. But then the fairies take babies to replace their own feeble children, changelings. Young mothers are snatched to suckle them. Abduction is a metaphor for the way the daimonic realm craves our robustness, our solidity. As Yeats said, the fairies need our strength while we need their wisdom. And indeed, the fairies don't only abduct, they also provide help, guidance, fertility. Our relations with them are often voluntary and reciprocal. The myths tell us how humans and fairies borrow troops from each other for their wars, and they even intermarry. Nowadays, unfortunately, such exchanges seem rather less romantic. A lot of people, undoubtedly some of you, have been abducted by the grey black-eyed aliens, and these no longer want young men to help fight their battles, nor young mothers for their milk. Instead, they steal sperm from the men, impregnate women, and later return to steal fetuses, as I understand, probably out of date now. The point I'm trying to make is the myths of human and daimonic exchange have undergone something of a debasement, I think. The metaphorical strength and nourishment the fairies used to get from us is now literalized into the aliens' genetic improvement program. And the wisdom we used to get from them becomes the advanced technology the aliens are set to supply the government with. In Africa, young people are routinely abducted. They're snatched from their beds by aliens with long faces, slit mouths, and large eyes. They're dragged off and systematically terrorized. Their genitals are operated on. They're given scars. Subsequently, they're entrusted with secrets. Now, all these are staple features of the alien abduction myth. But what I'm really describing, of course, is quite normal puberty rites, in which the elders of the tribe put on masks and paint, and posing as ancestral daemons, initiate their young people. They circumcise them, they scarify them, and generally terrorize them, and then give them the secrets to the tribe, and all the young people have to go through this ritual. Fear and pain of the young people is a near-death experience, the death of their whole childish life, and their rebirth into adulthood. Now, if such rites are delayed for any reason, the young people who reach their late teens or early 20s will still remain children. No initiation, no adulthood. Ritual transformation, that is, imaginative transformation, takes precedence over merely biological, merely literal change. Christian puberty rites like First Communion or Confirmation have abandoned any pretense of the same transforming power. They especially lack that fear and pain, which seems to be a necessary element of initiation. Non-Christians are left without any initiation at all, except unwittingly by family catastrophes or bereavements or illness or the ordeals of schooling or whatever fate thrusts on them. Initiation, after all, depends less on the experience itself than on the use we make of it. Any kind of suffering is useful, but we're usually encouraged to seek a cure for it instead. But our lack of any formal rituals, both to induce and channel suffering, might mean that we pay a heavy price. It might mean that we remain uninitiated, remain childish, selfish, dependent, literal-minded, mere victims of whatever life throws at us. Is it possible that our neglect of initiation has forced the daemon's hand, forced them to erupt out of the world soul as malevolent grey aliens who violate us? And imagine their dismay then, when the candidates they have chosen refuse to be transformed, and rush off to be treated instead for post-traumatic stress disorder. Hang on in there, I'm nearly done. In 1975, Sandra Larson claimed that she was kidnapped by grey aliens in North Dakota. She was taken, as abductees usually are, to a circular room lit by an invisible source. The aliens went to work on her, scraping the inside of her nose, opening her skull, removing her brain, and then replacing it. A year later, in Kentucky, Mona Stafford, Louise Smith, and Elaine Thomas were driving at night when they were dumbfounded by the appearance of an enormous, brightly lit object. They remembered nothing else at the time, but later they recalled grey aliens taking them to a sort of round, stiflingly hot cave where hot, sticky liquid was poured over them. Then their limbs were twisted and wrenched before Mona had her eyes removed and taken out of the sockets. In traditional societies, certain individuals report similarly stunning encounters. They're hit by bright lights, and often accompanied by fainting fits, sudden illness, or spontaneous states of trance or ecstasy. These signs, which would have us running to the doctor, are in fact traditional signs of a vocation of shaman. The initiatory vision includes some or all of the following features: dismemberment by demons in a circular cave lit by an invisible source, the purging or scraping of the body, which is then reconstructed with new organs or iron bones. A Yakut shaman reported that his eyes were taken out, washed, put back in again. There's usually an ascent to the sky for instruction by demons or gods, followed by a descent into the underworld for conversation with their demonic counterparts. Abduction, I think, is clearly a kind of initiation, the torment of having the bodily perspective dismembered, of being wrenched out of literal reality, twisted out of this world and its attachments. At the same time, it's the birth of a new perspective, the beginning of our daimonic selves, who can travel freely, at will, through the other world. The kinship between abduction and initiation was made quite explicit in the mysteries of Eleusis, into which all the ancient Greece intelligentsia were admitted. Myth tells us that the mysteries were founded by the first shaman, Orpheus, who was richly dismembered, and who made the perilous otherworld journey into Hades in order to retrieve his own soul, represented by his wife Eurydice. At the heart of these mysteries, it seems, was the prototype of all abduction. That was the one of Demeter's daughter, the Kore, who was snatched into the underworld by Hades himself, where she became Persephone, which means bringer of destruction. We also know from Proclus that in the most holy of the mysteries before the god appears, certain terrestrial daemons appear. Every god, he says, is surrounded by a multitude of such daemons, who are actually different manifestations of the gods who are themselves formless and unfigured. According to the Iamblichus, it is the daemons who put into operation that which the gods perceive, wish, and command. No one comes to the gods except by the daemons. He who denies the daemons, wrote Plutarch, breaks the chain that unites the world to God. So, finally, note of warning. If we deny the daemons, it'll be the worse for us. We know what will happen, because we know what happened to heroes, on whom our own heroic egos are modeled. Tale of Hercules, for instance, very cautionary one. He was refused initiation into the mysteries of Eleusis. Bad one. Unable, therefore, or unwilling to die metaphorically, he killed literally. It's as if even to recognize the daemons threatened him, as it threatens us, it threatens our egos with death. What happened to him? Well, his soul, in the person of his wife, was of course dying of neglect. Desperate to regain his attention, she sends him a shirt, and it's soaked in a love potion. Soul, we think, is constant. She goes on loving us, whether we admit it or not, whether we know it or not. But if we persist in denying her, her love can only reach us in a distorted form. And indeed the shirt reaches Hercules via a vengeful Daemon, Nessus the centaur. And he's really soaked the shirt not in a love potion, but in poison. Poison here is a metaphor for the only way love can act on the impervious ego, which, if it won't die to itself, will finally consume itself. So Hercules puts on the shirt, and maddened with pain, tears himself to pieces.
What is your take on the Hollywood photograph? Hollywood made a movie.
Yes, I've heard that. Yeah,
It's a
interesting.
pretty good story. That's funny. I know they've been. The women who took the pictures claim they're phonies about 50 years in.
No, that's not true. This is the Cottingley, the famous pictures of the Cottingley fairies taken by the two young girls.
Right.
So after Conan Doyle got very exercised over, they have been exposed as fakes. And if you look at them, they do look pretty fakey now. They must have seemed quite the same then, because to the eyes of faith. But of course, one of them was Elsie, who lived longest, said, "Oh, we did see the fairies. You know, we faked the photos for a laugh. But we played with them every day." And I think that's normal. I wrote an article in a magazine in England about fairies, just like these. I got a lot of mail from people who'd seen fairies. Rather disappointingly, not the great Irish fairies who clatter about on horses. You know, fantastic. But in England, it seems they've shrunk to size, and they were nearly all seen by people who'd seen them as children, and they were about so high. Or sometimes, you know, when you're very little, you have to have little tiny fairies. But a surprising number of people have played, I think, with little tiny fairies when they were little, in England anyway. Yes, sir.
Okay, I'll make it easier.
Yeah, make it very easy, please.
I'm reading up the subject and not expecting a specific judgment on the thing, but there is a certain daimonic element in science and technology, and I'm not really talking about things like quantum mechanics, which are already known, phenomenon and accepted, but rather there are things like cold fusion, you would call pyramid power and so forth, where some people say they've done experiments that work, and other people cannot reproduce the effect, and it has the same properties as a lot of these phenomena you're talking about, where
Very daimonic events, yes. Yes. Well, in my forthcoming book, I shall be arguing, amongst other things, that a great many of literal scientific processes are in fact literalizations of alchemical metaphors. The idea of fusion and fission is very alchemical. We know that really, and the whole world, the whole realm of subatomic physics is a very daimonic realm. But the subatomic particles behave exactly like fairies. That's where the fairies are. I believe in them literally as if it's a kind of madness, but you know, why not? Yes, sir.
I don't know if you're aware, but deep in the computer world, there are things which are called diamonds.
Are there?
Well, speak for somebody to shut up. In any decent Unix operating system, there's a little creature called cron that sets events in motion when told to do so. And it's called a daemon, spelled the same way.
Good. Fascinating. Well, good. They are coming back now.
Is it possible that we create these as small creatures simply so that we don't feel threatened by them, or, you know, if they were 10 feet tall instead of 2 feet tall, they can scare the heck out of us?
I don't know that we have any say in the matter, really. I'm not convinced of that. I think they come. We just look. And I think there probably are very, very big ones. And myths are stuffed full of giants. I guess a lot of people saw giants in the old days. I guess still do, you know, in some places, in other cultures. But they seem to be out of fashion for them, but maybe they'll come back. So, yeah.
You sort of give the impression that there's a very symbiotic relationship between the daemons and our reality.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you sort of quickly mentioned the true fairies and said, stay away from them, we don't know what they're doing, they're on another mission. How would you relate them to the symbiotic relationship that you discussed for the rest of the daemons?
I don't remember mentioning the trooping fairies.
The high hunt.
Oh yeah, well there are, yes, certainly. There are,
But they seem to be doing something that doesn't even fit into the system that you've described, is what I'm getting at.
yeah.
Do you have any better handle of what
Yeah,
they're
I think there are ways. No, I don't really. I mean, there are things like the wild hunt, and if it sweeps across the countryside. And there was an instance quite near where I live actually. A poor man was found, he's gibbering with fear, and this kind of black wind had gone over him. And, he could discern the sounds of huntsmen crying in it. I think you just got to stay clear. I mean, it's just terrible. I mean, you just duck, you pray. I'm amazed that more and more abductees don't pray, actually, because in the olden days, when the bad fairies came to get you, you just knelt on your knees and you begged God for mercy. And why didn't more people try that? Anything,
Well, of course, we're equally upset when the mail daemon comes back and tells us we've given it the wrong address and they can't deliver the email.
Yes, that is another daemon.
Yes, this is.
It's called that too.
Oh, good. Thank you very much for that information. Yes, sir.
What is your take on, what do you think of the Ouija board? Does it actually summon anything?
Sure. Yes. In my youth, I knew a lot of mediums. I think my grandmother was a very, very fine trance medium, and I worked with a wonderful Jamaican woman, Herida Hooker, and she was a kind of an emergency rescue squad for people who summoned up bad spirits. And she routinely used to go to places where people had been messing with the Ouija board, and she could sometimes find them pinned to the ceiling, thrown down the stairs. Actually, not often, I'm exaggerating, but it happened to her more than once. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't mess with the Ouija board, but on the other hand, if you take the right precautions, it's quite good fun.
Would you consider gremlins to be a species of demons? As of the kind that used to get into machines and mess up the...
I don't know. Probably, yes. I mean, I think they're everywhere. I think wherever we think that we've excluded them, the little bugs and loops you get in them, every system, is kind of Daimonic reminder that our perfect systems of order and clarity are always under threat. And I think everybody who's worked with machines knows that there are moments when you can't you take every precaution, something gets into the system.
Well, there is one though that supposedly creates order, the Maxwell demon.
Really?
That supposedly is a hypothetical construct that it could reverse entropy if you had one of those operating.
Hypothetical construct. I rest my case.
You mentioned the alien abduction experience prominently in this lecture. What about a parallel phenomenon, the whole angelic experience? Is that basically a Christianizing of this?
Yeah, it is a bit. I mean, I'm not that familiar with the angel literature, which I understand has been very big over here. I mean, I think it's evidence of the return of the daimonic generally, which I think is an interesting and good thing. I'd be a bit suspicious if they were the kinds of angels that are only, benign, pristine, helpful and wonderful. I mean, if you get one of those, great. But it is in the nature of demons to be both. They're very tricky customers, and they can really help you and guide you and do all the things that the angels do. But they can really, mess you up if you're not careful. And one of the ways is to pay them heed and give them respect, and then they're more likely to help you than not. You're trying to stop me. My book is called Daimonic Reality, Understanding Otherworld Encounters. It's published by Arcana, which is a part of Penguin in the States. I'm plugging it because they've just left it in the warehouse. I've got about 3 copies tonight.
Talk to Larry about that.
Thank you, Patrick, for a very intriguing and melodic presentation. Patrick, do you know if your book is upstairs in the book room? Did you bring some along?
It's not. No, I didn't get hold of the New York branch quickly enough, and so I've got no copies yet.
Okay.